There we go. We have 86. Oh, hi, Marge. So glad to see you back. I hope you're feeling well. See, it's so great to see people we love all in here. So I guess we'll start because I want to be respectful of time just so that we get our full hour in. Teachers and staff from Rainy River District School Board, I'm really happy to introduce you to Daniela Blahnik, who
Biondic.
is, pardon me?
Biondic, Daniela Biondic.
Biondic, from Learn Different in Toronto. And she has been a provider for Connected North for a couple of years, I believe, and has provided us with some amazing professional development in a variety of on a variety of topics, and did some fantastic sessions in February for the whole territory of Nunavut. And the feedback that we received from the teachers was it was valuable, it was practical, and it was necessary. So when Barb reached out and asked for some topics for professional development for all of us as we are at home and looking after our families and also taking care of the little students that you have who are online, Daniela instantly came to mind, and I'm so glad she's here to join us. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come out of the chat and the video and turn it over to Daniela, and Barb is going to monitor the chat if there are any questions. So Daniela, if you want to set your parameters on how you want the questions answered, if you want them on the fly, or if you want to wait for natural breaks, or it's up to you how you want to handle that. But Barb will be asking the questions on behalf of the staff from Rainy River.
Great. So thank you so much for that introduction. And in terms of the questions, I'm really happy to answer them as they come up, because they might be sort of related to other things everybody else is thinking. So I'm comfortable with sort of answering them. So Barb, don't worry about interrupting me or sort of interjecting a question. I will be sharing all of the slides at the end as a PowerPoint. I do have a few videos here embedded in the PowerPoints that I would love to be able to have available to everyone. So if we have some really important questions that I'd like to spend some time answering, if we don't get to all of the elements in as much detail, just know that all of the content will be given to you, so that you can review it and look back on it, as well as any notes and handouts and things. So Barb, if questions come, I'm very happy to answer them when they emerge.
That's exactly what we'll do then. Thank you, Danielle.
Perfect. Great. So thank you so much for the invitation to come in and speak to everybody today. The topic is really timely because we're in a really interesting place in our world, and we're all trying to find sort of a new sense of balance and security and a new sense of normal. And we're all kind of trying to do it in our own way. And in some ways we're sort of sharing commonalities around how we're trying to find that balance in our homes, in our professional lives, in our personal lives. And so I hope to be able to sort of share some of my thoughts on that today. This is a talk that I've created and given before that relates to something called compassion fatigue. So the exhaustion and burnout that comes along with doing work that benefits others, that takes care of others, that supports others, and that as a natural part of that work is that it can take a toll on us. And so how can we kind of care for that part of ourselves so that we can continue to do the work that we love? The piece that I've added to the talk today is addressing a little bit more about COVID and how we're all coping in this kind of new world. It's kind of that big elephant in the room that I feel like everybody is thinking about all the time. I'm certainly thinking about it, and so I've been doing a lot of training on that as well, and wanted to pull in some pieces that I found personally helpful, that I hope might be sort of helpful and encouraging to all of you as well. So today's talk is sort of a revamp of something that I've given before, that I hope will meet everybody's needs and provide a bit of support in this very strange time that we're in. So just a quick sort of introduction, just to sort of add on to the really lovely introduction that Mally provided beforehand. But I just wanted to give you a sense of where my training background is. So if anybody has particular questions, have a sense of where my scope of practice is. So specializing in mood and anxiety disorders, in the treatment of ADHD and executive functioning challenges, emotion regulation. A real passion and focus of mine for last number of years has been on treating complex trauma, developmental trauma, supporting parents, and also supporting teachers who are in that role of helping really vulnerable children. So just want you to have a sense of where I'm coming from. And also when I offer support and treatment, my focus is really from a strength-based approach, really looking at what children and families are coming to me with in terms of their own capacity, their own abilities, and building on those. So nobody's a blank slate. You all have some wisdom and knowledge and skill. And so can we heighten that and bring that out even more? So that's always been the focus of how I work. And I hope I can impart that sort of lens today in the content that I offer to you, that it can enhance all of the things that you're already doing so well and working so hard at doing. Let's make that kind of come alive even more for everyone. So one piece that I wanted to talk about in this kind of time of COVID is I want to touch upon the resilience and the personal strengths that we all have, when so much is uncertain. And we talk a lot about resilience and think a lot about that. How can I sort of manage and get through things and cope? And I like the idea of thinking about resilience as our heritage, our legacy, our birthright. It's something that we have inside all of us. There's the simple fact that we're all here today because our ancestors survived. So we're from a long, long line of survivors and strivers and people that have beaten the odds. And so I want to sort of start from this perspective that we all have this capacity to survive and thrive, and that, to an extent that is innate. From the very early kind of way of thinking about that as a fight, flight, or freeze response, we all have that sort of inborn, innate automatic response for coping with stress, with threat, and managing that. And, over time now we're figuring out new ways of sort of enhancing that, refining that. And the only way we can learn to build resilience and to cope is by facing obstacles. We just can't grow that skill without the challenge. So, the stressors and the adversity we're experiencing right now is that unique opportunity again to grow. And, it's that important reminder to know that we do have that resilience within us, and then we can get through it, and we're going to find our way. And I really love this way about thinking about resilience, that it's the learned capacity to cope with any level of adversity. So it can be a small annoyance of daily life to the struggles and sorrows that break our hearts. And resilience is essential for surviving and thriving in a world full of troubles and tragedies, and it's completely trainable. It's something that we can learn and develop. And the other piece too is it's recoverable. So we might have moments where we feel like we don't have resilience. We're out of, we feel like we've lost the capacity to cope, but it can come back. And we can do all of these things by teaching ourselves how to do this, by kind of reviving that ability. And I think that's really important to remember and to think about. The other piece is that resilience is a process. So we won't get it right the first time. And our needs are going to change over time as life becomes more complex, as we grow. So what worked for us before may not work for us now. Life has become more complex, or the people that are part of our lives have greater needs. And so, we're kind of flexing that survival capacity and refining it and strengthening it. And, here we're really also harnessing that power of neuroplasticity. So we talk a lot about, in psychology, in mental health, the power of the way that the brain can adapt and grow and change and rewire. And really the power of that is through repetition, through practice. That's the way that we create these new pathways, these new ways of re-engaging and creating new skills. And so part of building resiliency is figuring out what things you're going to take on, what things you're going to make part of your daily practice so that it becomes part of your coping mechanism, that becomes part of your kind of brain circuitry, actually. So I hope that today you can all identify some things you might want to take on and try and practice, so that when you really get backed into a corner, when life really becomes demanding, that circuitry can really light up and help you out. So that's also part of what we're thinking about today. What strategies do I have? Where are my strengths right now? And what do I want to grow and become and sort of start incorporating into myself? And, I also want to note that not all circumstances are equal. So we might all be experiencing a similar type of stress, the isolation, the flexibility that's required to cope with COVID right now. But, all of our situations are different. We have different external stressors. We have different resources in terms of who's around us or what is around us to help us and support us. And we have differences in terms of our own internal resources. Those of us might be more burnt out than others. Some of us might be more naturally optimistic than others. Some of us, might kind of spiral down into negative thinking more easily than others. So it's important to take stock of what you have right now at your disposal and seek support and help to bolster you. And it's going to be different for everybody. So again, I mentioned about the daily practice and how that's an important part of building that and strengthening that circuitry that becomes part of our automatic coping. And so it's rooted in a daily practice. And one thing that first responders do or are taught to do is something called box breathing, which many of you might be familiar with. So it's 4 inhales, 4 exhales, 4 inhales, 4 exhales. Very simple, and you can extend it by putting one hand on the heart, that sense of feeling the heart beat and feeling that rhythm has a calming effect on the nervous system. If you'd like to put one hand on the diaphragm, on the belly, that guides the depth of the breath. That's another sort of signal of how to sort of enhance box breathing. Counting to 4, counting to 4, counting to 4, counting to 4. Engages the higher order brain, takes us out of fight, flight, or freeze, gets us into the numbers, into the data, into the higher thinking. And when first responders are in training, they're taught and told to practice this box breathing multiple times a day. And at first it's, feels a little bit sort of unusual, not really part of daily life. But the thinking about it is if they can engage in that then in an automatic way, when the adrenaline is surging, when they're rushing to an emergency, if they're able to immediately engage in that depth of breath in that box breathing, it can really calm down their nervous system and free up the part of their brain that's making decisions, that's problem solving, that's thinking ahead. And, similarly, if we can all incorporate a practice that can relax our nervous system when we encounter those situations where our stress level really spikes. It could be in anticipating a conversation with someone. It's getting news. It's having to deal with an upset during the day, and engaging with that breath. Then we can bring ourselves to be able to free up and connect with that part of our brain that's going to be able to make the best choices. So this is, again, part of building our resilience. It's a small, simple activity that then becomes part of our coping mechanism that helps us really be at our best and sort of rise to the occasion when stress arrives. I like this picture because it sort of, I think, embodies a lot of what we're hearing these days. It can be a lot of conflicting information. Don't panic, follow the protocols, keep doing as you're doing, wear a face mask, wear a face mask, wear a face mask. We get pretty, it's pretty nerve-wracking. It's pretty distressing right now. And, this is a really unprecedented time. And right now we're so desperate for facts, for answers, for expert opinions, for statistical predictions. And this is really our way for our brain to seek out stability and for control. We want that roadmap, we want that manual, we want that guarantee that if I do these things, my be safe, my kids, my school's going to be okay, I'm going to be okay. We want that certainty so badly. But in the face of this pandemic, it's caused by a virus we don't really understand. There's so much that's out of our control. We can't control what our neighbors are doing. We can't control, the timing of a vaccine. And so, there's a lot of grief and anxiety that comes from that. There's also some feelings of loss that we, what we had in the past, is gone, at least momentarily. And we have some fears about the future. And we also might be feeling some sense of helplessness. And that feeling of helplessness can have a real negative effect on our mental health. And so how can we let go of what we can't control without just giving up? And I think the secret is to focus on what's happening right now, right in front of you. And if you can do that, if you can focus on the now, what's in your control now, what you're capable of doing now, you can be better equipped to solve the problems that you face. And accept the situations that you can't control. This is the best time to practice mindfulness, if there ever was one. And so we're experiencing a lot of worry, and I'd like to even term it toxic worry. And toxic worry comes about when we experience a lot of vulnerability and we experience a decrease in feelings of control. And so we can combat that by addressing these elements, feeling less vulnerable, feeling more in control. And I use the words feelings here because it's your perception that can make the difference. So if we're engaging in toxic worry, we can minimize our feelings of control, and we can feel more vulnerable than we actually are. So it's really important, I think, to also kind of keep those worries in check. And one way that I try to do that is keep it really simple. And so, the 3-step plan that I'd like to share is, connect, get the facts, make a plan. And probably step 4 would be repeat, because the plans we make are never perfect. So what I mean by connection is don't worry alone. So if you're engaging in a lot of worries, share those with somebody, stoke up, refurbish, renovate your connections with others, and share what's on your mind, share how you're feeling, share what you're wondering about. And the other step is get the facts. So I think excessive watching of the news has a way of really stoking your imagination, your fears. And toxic worry is almost always rooted in incorrect information. So get enough of the facts so that you're on solid ground. Get enough of what's going on in that day, what you need to focus on this day and maybe, another 24 hours later, and sort of leave it at that. Really kind of narrow your focus for the time being. and then make a plan. And you'll feel less vulnerable and more in control if you have some steps, if you have a bit of an action plan, if you have a focus for the day, a focus for the short term. And when your plan doesn't work perfectly, which it likely won't, you revise it, you connect again, you get the facts, you make another plan. So this is a way of really kind of controlling your focus, so you're not kind of generalizing that worry and getting yourself into a really low spiral. It's giving yourself something actionable and giving yourself a sense of control over what you can do. So today we're going to engage in all of those steps. We're going to think about connecting. We're connecting with each other today, which I think is wonderful. We're going to be getting some information, and we're going to be figuring out a plan. And so what I want to focus on today are these terms, the sense of compassion satisfaction. So this is what we all experience in engaging in the work that is so valuable and meaningful to us. But sort of the other side of that is the fatigue that could come along, and possibly the burnout, and possibly the vicarious trauma. And I'll explain what all those terms mean and how they can relate to your own experience. And then I'll speak about how do we assess that in ourselves. Today we won't have time to have everyone complete the self-assessment on their own, but I'll be sharing the questionnaire so that you can do it in your own time, and see where you're at in all of these things. And if we can self-assess, then we can get a sense of, where do I need some support? Where am I struggling? Where do I focus my energy? And we'll talk a little bit more about, how do we continue to bolster our resiliency? What do we know that helps? And what can we do what can we integrate into our personal wellness plan? So to start, I think it's really important to remind ourselves about what we love about our work. And right now we're at a time where our work looks really different than it did, a month ago, and definitely 2 months ago. And so in some cases, we might not really be feeling like ourselves because we're working in such a different way. We're not as connected to our colleagues. Our mornings don't look the same. And I think it's really important to kind of give yourself an opportunity to focus on why you're doing what you're doing, what parts of you are still there, no matter where you're teaching or how you're teaching, that you're still that educator through and through, and really think about the joy and meaning and value that is related to the work that you do, because that doesn't change. So I'm just going to introduce this model to you, how we understand, our own professional quality of life, and how those terms sort of relate to each other. So compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue are sort of opposite sides of the spectrum from one another. It's possible to still experience compassion satisfaction with what you do, but also feel a bit worn out. And what contributes to that fatigue? It's burnout, it's exposure to trauma, and secondary trauma is what I'm going to focus on today. And I think in particular these days, with the news reports and the information that's being shared, I think our exposure to secondary trauma, I would argue, is very, very high. And when I'm talking about these things, on the right side of your screen, there's a negative aspect to them. It's fatigue, it's burnout. All these words have negative connotations, but it's not. If you relate to any of these feelings, it's not meant to pathologize you. It's really, and this is a real natural response to the work that we're doing in supporting others and to being in that kind of caregiving, supportive role. And so I really like this quote, in that for natural responses that flow from our humanity, by feeling, thinking, loving, compassionate people who engage in this work. This is going to be a very natural, common occurrence. So that's sort of the frame I'd like you to sort of take on if you're identifying with any of these symptoms and qualities. So compassion satisfaction, this is a good place to start, because this is a feel-good sort of label. Aspects of helping, it's the pleasure, satisfaction, caregiving system. And I see schools as being that helping caregiving system too. And you're feeling good about your contribution that you're making to your workplace, to the society at large, to the way that you're supporting children's growth. It's all of the reasons why you're doing the work that you're doing. On the flip side of that, we have that sense of compassion fatigue. So the negative aspects of helping. And sometimes it can be related to just the drain and the amount of care that you're needing to. Sometimes there might be some systemic difficulties or constraints within your work. I'm thinking right now there's a lot of constraints in how we're doing our work. We have to do it so much more different. Here is the beliefs about the self. Sometimes when we have the sense of I'm not doing well enough, I'm not being efficacious, I'm not meeting my expectations, I'm not meeting the expectations I think other people have of me, those are all sort of thoughts and beliefs that can make us more prone to that fatigue, that exhaustion that relates to helping and being in that supportive role. And so another way of thinking about it is compassion fatigue is the profound emotional and physical exhaustion that helping professionals and caregivers can develop over the course of their careers. So this is long-standing, this is overarching, and it can become this gradual erosion of our empathy, our hope, our compassion, not only for others, but also for ourselves. We lose that sense of compassion and empathy for ourselves. And then we might feel this kind of erosion of our compassion, our ability to tolerate strong emotions or difficult stories. Sort of our bandwidth starts to really narrow, become more short-tempered, less patient, possibly feeling emotions and responding in ways that feel kind of not really like ourselves, not when we're at our best. So those are all signs of some compassion fatigue. And I think that's an important label to give it. It's fatigue. I'm getting tired. I'm not broken, I'm tired. So who's impacted? I think the title is sort of deceptive because really it's everybody. I give some examples here of maybe people we don't think about often as having compassion fatigue, but family lawyers, for instance, have higher rates of what I would call vicarious trauma, even compared to mental health counselors. You're hearing, terrible stories about family conflict and ways that people have been hurt in these loving, possibly were once very loving families. Mental health workers, police officers, the social workforce experiences high levels of this personal distress. So it's really important to acknowledge that this experience is really widespread. Other people that experience compassion fatigue are those that work doing research on the environment and looking at the impact of climate change, seeing the loss of ecosystems and animals. And, this experience is really common. And I think it's helpful to think about that, because if you're recognizing it within yourself, you're in very good company. Many people are experiencing this. So what else does it look like? So it's noticing changes in our personal and professional life. We might feel more dispirited. We might feel more bitter. We might notice that we're more prone to errors. We're just not able to concentrate as well and catch those things. Maybe we're not catching our errors because we just don't feel that sense of responsibility, passion, focus anymore. We might notice that we are losing that respectful stance toward our colleagues and people that we're interacting with on a daily basis. Maybe we're sort of, using more colorful language than we want to be, being a little bit too relaxed, or we're just sort of not sort of maintaining our kind of professional or professionality as we used to. Maybe it's also kind of filtering out into our homes where we're becoming more short-tempered with loved ones. That feels kind of out of character. And also feelings of guilt or resentment on the demands that the work is having on our personal time. So all other signs of compassion fatigue. So now I'm moving into, what's under that. What does compassion fatigue look like when it's becoming a little bit more intense? It's becoming more significant. So then we're thinking about burnout and secondary trauma, and I'll open up those topics a bit more. So with burnout, the onset is gradual. It's that slow burn, that slow kind of crumbling. And what it's characterized by is exhaustion. It's cynicism. So it affects the way that you think about the world. What does it matter why I do this? It's not going to make a difference. Who cares? and feeling a decreased efficacy. I can't do this. It doesn't make a difference. I can't do this. Some of those thoughts. And some of the associated feelings are frustration, anger. Depression is more of that sort of significant, deep level of sadness and rejection, hopelessness, difficulty coping with the workload, powerlessness, all of those feelings. I really like this cartoon. It says, I feel like I need you less, Mom, now that I can make myself guilty all on my own. So again, with that burnout of, I'm so good at making myself feel awful and incapable. And it becomes this sort of, terrible record that plays over and over and over and over again. And then the other sort of side of that that kind of adds to that compassion fatigue and really enhances it is the experience of trauma. So there's different types of trauma. So we have here, what I'll talk about is primary trauma. So trauma, the way we define it in the psychological sense is it's when a person experiences a threat to their life or their body. And it could be an actual threat or perceived threat. I think something is going to happen to me. It doesn't happen, but I had that real experience where I thought my life was in danger, or that my body, my well-being was in danger. Or also that other experience of having something traumatic happen and having a real difficulty of integrating the emotional impact. You're kind of overwhelmed by what happened, have a difficult time understanding it, kind of putting it aside. It's sort of replaying over and over again. And so some of us may have had the experience of a primary traumatic stress. So it's when you have directly experienced it, and it can relate to things such as medical procedures, natural disaster, house fire, assault, intimidation, domestic violence. There's quite a lengthy list. I hope that those of you connecting haven't had that experience, haven't had it recently with any illnesses related to COVID, but that would sort of fall under that too, any medical procedures related to those experiences. And the other piece too, that might be more common is what I would call secondary trauma. So it's exposure to people who have experienced trauma. We can call it secondary trauma. We can call it vicarious trauma. So I haven't experienced the trauma, but I'm hearing you tell me the story of what happened to you, how you were impacted, and hearing those stories and being witness to that can have traumatic effects. So here we're seeing that experience of feeling driven by fear. We might have sleep difficulties. We might have intrusive images. We might have reminders of the traumatic experience where you see something around and it reminds you of a story someone has shared with you. And I think the secondary trauma is actually quite pervasive now, especially in the news reports that we're probably watching and reading about and seeing images of. I'm thinking for myself, I was really struck by the images of families kind of grieving in Italy and how they kind of managed, the burial of a loved one, and, just how much we were sort of exposed to those stories and how kind of intrusive and really upsetting that content is. So I'm mentioning these things because when we're supporting children, when we're supporting communities, we do get exposed to that vicarious trauma. We can't help it. If we're connecting and supporting others, we're going to hear about things, we're going to hear stories, we're going to be told things firsthand. And that carries its own weight in terms of fatiguing us in the role that we're playing. So vicarious trauma can negatively affect your work. It can affect your colleagues. It can affect the whole organization. And so it can really influence the way that you act and you interact with the people that you love. It can affect your family and your friends. It's when the work stress and the content that you face in your workplaces, in your work, really trickle out into the rest of your life. And so what does that look like? How do we know we're experiencing some symptoms of vicarious trauma, of that secondary trauma? Are you having difficulty managing your emotions? Are you having trouble making decisions? do you have trouble managing your boundaries between yourself and others? Are you taking on too much responsibility? Are you having difficulty leaving work at the end of the day? Are you trying to step in and control someone else's life? And by controlling someone else's life, I don't mean by being pushy and overbearing, but you're trying to exert a sense of control because you want to take care of them. You want to protect them. You want to avoid something terrible happening to them because you have that worry for them. Are you noticing problems in your relationship? Are you actually feeling some more physical symptoms, aches, pains, more illness, more accidents, sort of trips and falls and those types of things? And I mention that because it can become this sort of psychosomatic experience of that sort of stress and anxiety and pain can really take a toll on our own body's functioning. That difficulty feeling connected to what's going on around and within you. This relates to, sense of dissociation, things feeling really unreal and not being connected to our own body, the here and now. And, sometimes when we've had a lot of exposure to vicarious trauma, we also notice that we're having a loss of meaning and hope. And so, these all kind of come along with being sort of witness to these stories. These are not permanent experiences. They can change. They can improve over time. But it's important to sort of acknowledge and notice what impact they're having on you so that you can give yourself some care and move out of that place of fatigue and vicarious trauma to feeling more control, feeling less vulnerable, feeling more efficacious in your life. So the self-assessment that I'd like to share is the professional quality of life assessment. And this one I'm going to be sharing with you all as an attachment later. It's not terribly long, but I just want to show you what you can sort of get out of it after you've completed it. It'll give you a sense of where you are in terms of your compassion satisfaction. It'll give you a sense of how much burnout, or are you experiencing any symptoms of burnout? And it'll allow you to weigh in on whether you've had any secondary traumatic stress exposure. And this is not meant to be a pathologizing questionnaire. If you take it and you realize, wow, I'm really burnt out. Oh my gosh, should I be going on, disability leave? Am I broken? Can I not do my job anymore? That's not the case. It's really meant to just be kind of a bit of a, taking your temperature, so to speak, on how you're feeling in the moment, how you're feeling now, as a way to encourage you to take some steps to take care of yourself, but also to give yourself a bit of self-compassion. If you're struggling with staying focused, with managing the tasks on your plate, it can be helpful to know, wow, I'm actually struggling in this way because I'm feeling a little burnt out. I've worked really long. I've had some terrible nights of sleep. And I've, also been exposed to some traumatic stories. I think that's been taking a toll. Maybe I need to sort of reframe my expectations for myself this week. Maybe I need to reach out and actually get some help. Maybe I need to delegate some of the things I have on my plate in order to give myself the time and space to take care of myself, so that I can keep doing this work. So it's really meant to sort of prompt more self-care and self-compassion, and can be an opportunity to also share. If you have some colleagues who are also doing this, you can kind of compare scores and see how you can help each other. Because there really is a cost to caring. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And I think this is an important quote to share, and maybe something you can, read and come back to later. So, there's this expectation sometimes that we hold that we can be immersed in suffering and loss and not be touched by it. And that's as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. It's just not possible. And this sort of denial is no small matter. So the way we deal with loss shapes our capacity to be present to life more than anything else. The way we protect ourselves from loss may be the way in which we distance ourselves from life. We burn out not because we don't care, but because we don't grieve. We burn out because we've allowed our hearts to become so filled with loss that we have no room left to care. So the idea is, you know, you can grieve, you can hurt, and sort of acknowledging that as part of the work that you're doing. You know, allowing yourself to sort of notice those battle wounds, to notice, you know, how we've been sort of weighed down by what we're doing. And it is a reflection of how hard we're working at this and how much we care, and not denying ourselves that, you know, that ability to sort of acknowledge, you know, what is part of the work that we do, that there is this cost to caring, and that we're taking this on willingly. And in deciding to take on self-care and to care for yourself, you know, that's a matured way of growing into your careers. Just as you do so much professional development around supporting your students, you know, self-care is also part of that career development. So instead of viewing the symptoms of compassion fatigue as a pathological condition that requires some external treatment agent or techniques for resolution, can we begin to see these symptoms as an indicator of the need for the caregiver to continue his or her development into matured caregiving and self-care styles and practices? You know, can we take this idea of compassion fatigue as a learning, from a learning perspective, to show us how we need to sort of grow and change in order to care for ourselves and protect ourselves, so that we can continue doing, you know, the important and the challenging work that we're doing. So symptoms of compassion fatigue can be interpreted as a message from what is right, good, and strong within us, rather than an indicator of what's shameful, weak, defective, or sick. So, you know, as much as it sort of has these negative connotations, can we reframe it and see it as really kind of the battle wounds of what we're really doing, and we're hurting because we're doing something that's really real and meaningful, and can we continue to sort of bolster ourselves and support ourselves to keep doing it? If we're hurting, if we're tired, if we're feeling short-tempered, it's not because we're shameful, we're weak, we're a bad person. It just means that we're absorbing and trying to integrate the experiences that we're having in order to continue doing this work. So compassion fatigue is like dirt that gets under a gardener's nails, or paint that's on a painter's shirt. It's part of the job. It's going to be part of your experience. You know, sometimes, if we use the dirt analogy, you know, a little soap will wash it off. Sometimes you need to get that scrubber in there. Sometimes you need to soak for a while. Some days, some weeks, some years. Some students will kind of weigh on us more than others. And it's sort of identifying that fatigue as just part of the job. And if we see it show up in our lives, can we take that as an invitation to start caring for ourselves, so that we don't fall into burnout, and then we don't fall into depression, and we ultimately don't leave the profession, that we experience a lot of compassion satisfaction in doing, and that we derive a lot of joy and value in doing. So the idea of focusing energy on identifying compassion fatigue, is to keep you in your careers and keep you doing the work that's really meaningful. I'm going to offer this video as something you can watch later, just in respect of time. But this is a TED Talk that's offered by one of the authors. I'll share some resources from later. But she talks about the impact of working with people who have experienced trauma and had shared difficult stories with her, and how that kind of invaded her experience on a family vacation. It's a pretty funny story, but it's also really relatable. And I think she presents it really wonderfully in terms of kind of how the work that we do and the challenges that we face can really kind of get to us. And it's important to really check in with yourself when you realize, like, oh, I'm acting a little bit weird these days. What's going on here? And so I'll just leave that video for you to be able to watch and take in later. Whoops, I'm going to pass through it. This diagram, again, is just a way of being able to use this as almost sort of a check-in, sort of gauge your trauma exposure, gauge your level of compassion fatigue. And so sort of circling this image are some qualities you might notice in yourself. And, if they're kind of creeping up and coming up quite often, so here we have feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. Hypervigilance is, noticing and being on the lookout for danger or threats. Diminished creativity is another one. Kind of lose that sense of creative thought and sort of thinking quality when we're feeling really overwrought and under a lot of stress. Let me see what other pieces. Guilt is another one. Being unable to empathize or feeling really numb to other people's emotions, feeling really shut down. So I'm presenting these and offering this as sort of another way to sort of check in with yourself and seeing if any of these sort of feelings, thoughts, actions are kind of coming up for you. So we often live on this continuum, when we're in the green zone, everything is great. We've just come off of vacation. We're feeling relaxed. We're feeling rejuvenated. The green zone doesn't last very long because we live in a world that has a lot of stressors, a lot of demands. So the green zone is that perfect zone where we can manage everything and we've got plenty of energy. The red zone is where we've burnt out, and a massage or a walk or a swim isn't really going to cut it. Watching something on Netflix is not really going to cut it. And the important part I want to emphasize for you all here is identifying when you're in the yellow zone. When are you at risk? Because this is where we can be proactive. And we often live in the yellow zone where we're having our vulnerabilities. And that's a really good place to act. And it's it's about finding that balance between our work demands and what we need to do on a daily basis, and also taking care of ourselves. And educators and first-line responders and caregivers and helpers are so good at putting themselves last all the time. So, it's finding that balance of putting yourself, on that list of things to do. And figuring out how to do that, making yourself a priority. There's lots of ways we can increase our resilience, and in a more sort of detailed talk, I talk about sort of organizational elements we can sort of think about and what we can do in a professional level. But I do want to focus today on the individual strategies and skills we can think about incorporating in terms of increasing our own resilience. And, we're taking the opportunity to build our own resilience. And this is, again, as I said before, it's a daily process. And, it's offering yourself some compassion and gratitude for who you are and how far you've come. And when the future is uncertain and all we have is now, now is when you can really practice that self-care. So what do we do? What can we do to increase our own resilience in the face of, compassion fatigue, work fatigue, possibly reducing our risk of burnout and coping with that vicarious trauma we might be exposed to? So increasing self-awareness is really important. Why is it important? We want to have a sense of when our body is experiencing stress responses. We're really good at running on autopilot. Some of you may have, moved from one room to another and had no idea why you went there or what you were supposed to get. We can kind of really kind of be numbed out to our days and sort of go through the motions. And when we kind of go through the motions, we're not noticing those early physiological or emotional stress signals. And it's really important to notice those, because there's that, again, is an opportunity to be able to act or notice, to be able to sort of minimize things from sort of spiraling out and intensifying. Mindfulness is another way to tune into your stress signals, sort of being able to take notice, check in with your body, check in with your thoughts, having a sense of what's going on around you. and mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness has been shown to make some really positive changes in the brain circuitry and brain connectivity. There have been a number of MRI studies looking at novice and very professional and practiced practitioners of mindfulness. But even after about 8 weeks of daily practice, nothing too intense, but 8 weeks of daily practice, it's been shown that people's connection from to their frontal lobe has been stronger. It's intensified our neural connections in the part of our brain that does forward thinking, planning, problem solving, all of that higher level thinking. And mindfulness has reduced the intensity of our amygdala. So that's the fight, flight, and freeze response center. That's the emotional reactivity. That's the survival strategy. That's that sort of quick thinking, impulsive brain center. And so through engaging in mindfulness, we kind of increase our self-awareness, but then we also decrease our capacity to respond in a way that is going to be too impulsive or possibly create more challenges. So it really does help us kind of tune in, but also be able to think and use our best selves to work through challenges. And then, another piece is around the self-care. So I included here limiting exposure to traumatic stories. So what I mean by that is if someone has something they need to share with you, it's not saying, I'm not listening to you. Sorry, can't, I'm trying to take care of myself. I'm practicing self-care. I don't want to listen to that right now. It's the other stuff. It's making a conscious effort to, think about how we're engaging with the news around us. So, do we stop taking in, say, YouTube videos of news reports or watching the news because the imagery is too kind of profoundly upsetting? Do we just kind of read something, read the paper, read an online news story, take in the news of the day, and leave it at that? Because again, if we're exposed to a lot of traumatic content, then we're going to be, and if we're not limiting our exposure to other traumatic content, we're going to be really sort of having a lot of challenge sort of maintaining our resources for balancing and supporting others in the work that we do. I see there was a question. Is there one that I can address now?
Okay, here's the question.
Mm-hmm.
This point is something that an individual living alone does not have. Facebook only works for so long. How can we explain to our organization so that some of the restraints they put on employees impact some in a very negative way?
So Facebook as a way of connecting with colleagues is that sort of what was sort of mentioned as a way of sort of keeping connection and experiencing support in an organizational setting?
I think maybe it's the strong social support at home and work. So if you're living alone,
mm-hmm.
have that strong social support at home. And right. Like in our current situation, this is just what I'm reading into this. So
yeah.
The question, feel free to clarify.
Yeah.
I think we're looking at, the restraints that have been put on us are impacting us in negative ways.
Mm-hmm. So that piece is certainly challenging for many people, that sense of strong social support at home and work. And I think, here it kind of comes to, and I might be able to elaborate on it in some of the other strategies I share. So, having enough social support at work can be a challenge because our time is so limited, but also everybody is feeling really stressed. So we might have less sort of availability to sort of support one another. And social support, in this time can kind of look like sharing with each other what the struggles are and being able to find ways to sort of resolve an issue together, to kind of come together. So it's not so much sort of looking for a solution, but coming to a solution with other colleagues. I think at these times when we're really isolated, we have to find ways to sort of share what's on our plate. That takes some vulnerability, but being able to find, say, a trusted colleague with whom you can kind of share what you're struggling with, so that you can either work on a solution together or offer that support together. And I think if we can kind of open up that conversation more and more, that can lead to some changes on an organizational level. Because if you're experiencing some work challenges, it's possible that there's at least one other colleague that is feeling the same way. And if we're thinking about wanting to, preserve, our employees and have, people stick around and continue working, if there are some systemic challenges that are really burning people out, and it's becoming more and more common, and it just can't, and it's sort of lasting, and it's recurring through the weeks and through the years, we really have to find a way to make some changes in order to support each other. So the social support at work can be a bit of a process. I think it starts with some disclosures, and that can be sort of around, sharing, say, talking about this talk and saying, "Oh, I heard about this compassion fatigue thing. Can I share with you what I learned about that? Do you feel this way ever?" And it, I think, requires people to be able to sort of be willing to share, but there to be a safe space in order to do it. Because I think talking about burnout and talking about frustrations can be a challenge. People can feel like it makes them look like they're not capable, or something wrong with them. And so I think there also needs to be sort of a willingness to sort of accept feedback in order to, I think, make a stronger organization. I think the social support piece at home can kind of come in different ways. I think, your home life can include the people that are around you, but I think social support at home too can be sort of the ways that you find space to connect with others. I know Facebook is not ideal, and I think right now we're having to sort of work at a time where we're having to be so distanced from other people, and I think that feels really unnatural. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where speaking, connecting in this way is as good as meeting in person, sitting next to someone. I think we're experiencing a lot of stress around that, because this is a really kind of unusual way to be in this world. We're dealing with stress, and the people that we need to help us with that are so far away. And not only are they far away, we actually can't see them. We're not allowed to see them. So this part is really hard. And I have to admit that being able to foster strong social support at home is a really difficult one, because the strategies and the ways that we did that in the past are not available to us right now. So it's really difficult. So I think we need to be able to use technology as best as we can. And I think, but also moving off of texting, emailing, finding ways to just connect with someone's voice, giving them a call, and also just sort of checking in. Can we find ways to play, online games, I think, for instance, can be a really lovely thing to share, because sometimes our days are so flooded with stress, or so flooded with monotony, that we feel like we don't really have much to talk about, and we don't really have a break. So can we sort of engage with other people around us by starting a book club, watching the same show together, being able to kind of connect around other topics and interests that kind of give you a break from the stress you're experiencing on the daily basis. So I think we're having to be really creative right now, and some of our strategies are not going to work well, because we're in this really unusual time. But I hear what you're saying, that Facebook is just doesn't cut it, because it does feel really impersonal, and ultimately you're still alone at home. So it doesn't feel the same way. But what else? Yeah.
It really takes, first of all, it's like you said, there's a lot of vulnerability there. And it takes a lot of trust in order to be able to share, your feelings and where you're at, and also empathy from the person on the other end in that information. One of our participants said that she's on a group text with 3 other colleagues, and they connect most days for a little chat, and she also makes time to connect by phone with them as well. And she said it takes time, but it is worth it.
Yeah, it does take time. And sometimes you just don't want to connect, and it's kind of doing it anyway. It's hearing that other person's voice. You know, we need that connection. You know, we're all social beings. Like, we weren't born in this world and meant to be on our own. You know, we survive with each other, and now we're extremely stressed, and we can't be around anybody. It's so difficult. It's so unnatural. And so we have to try something, to feel that connection, to feel that creativity. In the slides that I'll offer later, we may not be able to touch on them here, but there's still resources. So I just want to reference them now. I make a suggestion of making a connection list. And this doesn't just mean connection, you know, who am I connected to in my community or in my home, but what other things help me feel connected to myself. So things like music that I've loved, or books, or stories, or shows. You know, this is a time to not feel guilty about watching TV, because I feel like we're so separated and distanced from our sense of life and our sense of who we are in this world, that it's really important to kind of connect with the interests and the things that you really love, that make you feel like you, that not not this automaton that's connecting over Zoom all the time. It just makes you feel more connected to who you are, to your creativity, to your joy, that might sort of bring up, you know, positive past memories, looking at old photos, remembering a story, having a good laugh about something. I think that's really, really important to engage with right now, because we're in such a weird space where we're kind of working in a way that isn't the way we usually work. We can't see people. We can't do what we would normally want to do. And if you're ill on top of that, or caring for someone that's ill, your life is even more constrained. It's extremely difficult. And so mental health challenges, I think, are particularly, more heightened at this time. Being isolated can make some things feel even better, and can make hard things feel even worse. So I think we have to find ways to reach out. And I think finding that sort of connectivity to the people that you trust, you know, around you, that you can connect by phone or text or video, is really important. The work piece, as Barb mentioned, is that it takes more vulnerability, and it can be really scary. And some workplaces may allow for it more than others. And to the extent possible, can you find a support network within your workplaces first, as a way of being able to share and disclose? And that would be my starting point. But ultimately, we need to make workplaces feel like safe places to share, because ultimately we all have the same goal of being able to support, do work and do good work, and support the children around us. And if there are some factors that are getting in the way of doing that, you know, we want to change those so that we can help people do the work that they've been, you know, really called to do and feel passionate about. But those are really good points. And I think those are really difficult things to consider right now. I think there's another question. I don't know if I can, I'll skip ahead to some other pieces, but I'm happy to answer another question if someone has one.
There's a couple of comments. So one is, for those with computers, we could FaceTime or video messenger to make face-to-face connection. I totally do that. I do that with a relative of mine in Winnipeg quite regularly, and it really does help. And then said having watch parties, movies or series with discussions, or book clubs with colleagues and friends could be to connect while we're alone right now.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. And also, you know, there can be a lot of rumination where we're sort of sharing the news of the day and just feeling so pulled down by the content, by the lack of certainty in our lives, that I think it's really important to take a break from those moments, not to, you know, forget about what's going on in the real world, but to have a break from it, because it really has a way of increasing our sense of vulnerability, and doom, and fear. And so I think it's really important to find ways to enjoy something to us. You know, that's sometimes we think about escape in a negative way, but, you know, as I listed here, finding something you can immerse yourself in, that you can really enjoy, where you can kind of disappear for a little bit, take a little bit of a break, have a bit of a breather. Resting, playing, All of those things I think are really important. They not only kind of connect you to other people, can be something that you can share, but again, connect you to that sense of you that kind of might feel a little blunted or sort of dim right now, because this isolation is extremely difficult. I'm just going to move forward again, just to give you a preview of what I'm talking about. But when we're experiencing, some of this burnout, some of this trauma, it's really important, again, that sense of connection in some way, being able to sort of celebrate joys, mourn losses, engage in your traditions, your rituals, your ceremonies as best as you can. I think those are really important parts of life. This year people were still engaging with Passover and Easter, and being able to sort of engage in those traditions. They are not the way that they used to be before, but I think still marking those points in the year, I think, are really, really important. They connect us with our cultures and with ourselves, and also with a sense of future. And again, sort of taking stock of what's draining you and what your expectations are for your job. I think this is a particularly important question to ask of yourself now, because our jobs are so different. And so we might feel like we're really falling short because we're comparing ourselves to a way of working and doing and collaborating that is very different. And right now it takes more work, it takes more coordination. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that your job right now is still the same job, but you're having to do it in a different way. You're going to have to do it in a way that feels very unfamiliar, maybe unnatural. And I think it's important to give yourself credit for the way that you're doing it, and you're coping and you're adjusting. And so adjusting your expectations. It's not saying lowering your expectations, it's adjusting them and giving yourself credit for what you're doing and how creative and resourceful you're being. So again, I sort of talk about it. The starting point of how do we care for ourselves is becoming aware of what's getting to you, how those issues are affecting you. Is being isolated at home on your own really starting to get to you? Is it bringing up a lot of negative feelings? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you feeling angry? Just being able to acknowledge that and figure out what you can do then to kind of create some kind of balance, and how to integrate balance and connection to be able to sort of cope with what's going on. It's not sort of sitting on the sidelines and saying, okay, I'll engage with life when all of this profound crapola, if that's how we want to think about this, is over. And it's not a race. We're not trying to kind of rush to the end when we start feeling better again. And can we start every day with asking ourselves, why am I doing what I'm doing? Reminding ourselves of who we are and what value we find in what we're doing, why we made the choice to do this work. Just reminding yourselves of that, I think, is really important. So the next slides, and I know we're at a time now, are my thoughts and ideas and strategies around some wellness plans you can integrate, taking stock of what's on your plate, learning to say no to extras, saying yes to opportunity and fun. I think that can be a particularly hard one, especially when we're having to figure out new ways of doing work. It takes more time. And so we might sort of balance that by giving ourselves less time for us. I think delegating is really important, and asking for support. We're really great at making lists of things to do, but I would invite you also to take a look at your list of things to do and see which things energize you, excite you, and which things exhaust you. That could be a good way of checking in on what you've sort of set out for yourself that day, and how you can find an opportunity to either ask for help, reach out, break tasks down, or inject some more enjoyment into your day. It can be really difficult to get up in the morning if everything that you have on your list of things to do is exhausting and draining. That cup of coffee is not gonna cut it. And then I'm just offering some slides around how to increase your body awareness, how to kind of go about doing that. It's easier for some people than others. And I'll be providing some links to videos and to resources, online resources that contain sort of guided meditations and relaxation strategies that can be helpful. Again, seeking nature, that's still available to us. We're having to be apart from each other, but I think that's really, really important to be able to at least engage in that a little bit. Play again. And so we think about play in different ways. We can play with our kids, but can we be playful by, again, watching a funny show, watching a movie, reading a book, and then connecting with others around that? I think is really, really important. And have it not be goal oriented. Don't pick a book for your book club that you, again, can read with your students at school. Pick a book that you're interested in reading that really has no bearing on any professional development or relates to any career goals. Pick something you want to read. And here's my list of connections, taking stock and listing the things that make you feel connected to others and that help you feel connected to yourself, to your culture, to the people that you love, I think is really, really important, because our physical connection is not an option right now. How else can we feel connected? So I invite you to make a list of that and to pursue some of those things. And so again, I'm going to share this. UC Berkeley has a wonderful website with amazing resources called the Greater Good Science Center. And they have some amazing activities that you can do personally. Some of them take about 5 minutes. Some of them take about 10 minutes. If you're somebody that likes something that's a bit more structured. And so these can be resources that you can pull on and try out and share if you want to kind of incorporate something more structured in your self-care. And so here I'm just listing some ideas of activities you can do, for 10 minutes in a day, and see how it feels. And if you kind of make this part of your daily practice, see what can feel possible and how that might change your outlook on the day, the way that you feel about yourself, your ability to connect with others. Does that cause any shift in how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis? I do offer some suggestions around meditation and mindfulness. This can be a real struggle for some people. They might find they have a really, really active brain and can feel kind of frustrating to do. So I'm offering some strategies of how to do it and what might work for you. So I offer different methods and offer some details about how to do that. So one is anchoring, one is resting and laying and not doing anything counts as meditation in my books. I think that's a really good one to do. And being, and I go into detail about what I mean by that. How do we do that? And if you want to do a formal practice, give yourself 5 minutes to do, these 3 sort of mindful relaxation approaches, 5 minutes out of your day, at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, or when you're feeling kind of exhausted or frustrated, might be a really wonderful thing to try out. And so I'm giving you some suggestions about how to go about doing that if that's not something that you've done before or have anybody to sort of do it along with. So I hope these might give you some pointers for how to incorporate that in your day. Again, in the slides, I have this video. It's a TED Talk that's conducted by a man that does time-lapse photography of flowers and nature. And sort of layered on that is this idea of sort of compassion and appreciation and gratitude for where you are right now. And I think we can really struggle to find that because we're in a place in our world right now that we're not really happy about. And so I want to invite you all to watch this when you have a moment, in the days to come. It's a really meaningful and beautiful kind of meditation on gratitude and really the beauty of the world and, all of us within it. So I'm just embedding this as a video to share. I've also included the link in case you have any trouble with viewing the video, and I hope you can watch it. So I hope you have some items you can sort of take home with you today. And I hope some of these slides will be a resource for you to be able to sort of investigate further, to take stock of how you're feeling, how you're coping, and it gives you some ideas and strategies for how to care for yourself, how to make that more of a priority. And also some self-compassion around the fact that the way that you're feeling now is temporary, it can shift, that you are resilient. We're all here because we are from people that have survived, that we have that in our blood, we have that in our DNA, and that we will get to the other side of this. We're just going to have to figure out how to do it best for us. So I love ending on this point, this idea of each of you is perfect the way that you are. And you can use a little improvement, that it's possible to be both, to be doing just fine, and to be able to do a little bit better. Thank you all for connecting. Thank you all for giving me 10 additional minutes of your time. I know that you're all working incredibly hard and harnessing all of your creativity and working in a very different fashion these days. Thank you for giving yourself the time to take in this information, to find ways to care for yourself. I hope this can give you permission to do something kind and compassionate for yourself today. I hope it can inspire you to reach out to other people, to other parts of yourself that maybe has sort of been buried under the rubble of trying to kind of cope with this COVID world. I hope that you're all well and that your loved ones are well. And I hope I can offer you some resources that can bring us all to the other side of this.
Daniela, on behalf of all of us at the Rainy River District School Board, thank you for spending some time with us this morning. You had a wealth of information, and I'm sure many like me can't wait to dig into the resources. And we just really appreciate your support of us during this time. And we hope that you have a wonderful day as well.
Thank you so much. I really loved connecting with you today. Connecting with all of you makes me feel more like myself. So this was really wonderful. And I'll be sharing all the resources with you in the next couple of minutes.
And thanks, Daniela and Barb and the staff at Rainy River District School Board. As Daniela said, it makes us feel a little bit more like who we are, and that all of that material was extremely valuable. And just even if we take away one of those strategies, it will help us all. And Daniela has also offered to do a second presentation, and she'll send me some topics that I'll send to Barb. So thanks everybody for coming and spending time out of your precious days, and just enjoy the day. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks all. Thanks, Mally.